All right. Today on Open Loops, we have someone I'm very excited about. Peter Blum. That's right. Someone who has dedicated his work into two areas, which I'm both very interested in: neo-Ericksonian hypnosis and shamanic sound healing. He's written written a couple books, and recently had a book that has come out called "What Is Your B.S?" Exploring belief systems through hypnosis and NLP. Super excited about this because it doesn't just seem like your typical here's how you change your limiting beliefs kind of book. It's going into the depths of using this hypnosis work and in the mind technology to shift people to different perspectives. And given that, Peter is also in the shamanic world, I love that it's not just hey, let's shift your belief systems to make you feel better. It's what if your belief systems could really transcend your current paradigm of living entirely? At least, given his interest, we could go there. And I'm hoping to. I think we will. I've enjoyed talking to him so far. Peter, thanks so much for coming on the show.
You're quite welcome, and thank you for having me. I don't know where we're going, but we'll go there together.
Yes, yes, I love it. I love Well, look, I mean, is this did you have hippie parents? Were you like a scientific kid? What was your did you
Well, no, the term hippie wasn't around in the 50s. I had bohemian parents.
Oh.
Yeah, that was pre-Beatnik. The Bohemians. My dad was an had a dual career, being a salesman by day and an opera singer at night. And
Oh, yes.
my mom was a life member of the Art Students League and was a very gifted watercolor artist. So that was the world I grew up in. Typical, third generation Eastern European, New York City Jewish, culturally Jewish, but nothing else really. Woody Allen said, it's more of certain types of food and a certain kind of sense of humor that
Yes.
what 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 defined it. And then because I was curious and I guess good with math and words, I did well on those kinds of tests that they gave back then. Stanford Binet IQ tests, and I got into a specialized school called the Bronx High School of Science, which was one of the leading public schools in the country. So even though I wasn't really interested in science, I did not want to go there. I
Yeah.
wanted to go to music and art, which was but my parents said, no, you got into Bronx Science, you're going there. So I went there and I met some interesting people. At that point in the mid 60s, the folk music era was coming along, and the members of the sane, students for a sane nuclear policy and SNCC and all that stuff. It wasn't quite revolution in the streets, but it was going there, and that was. I am, I would say I am a very prototypical child of the '60s. I graduated high school in '64, and I spent 5 years in New York City from '64 to '69, taking every drug I could find. And well, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It was a time of innocence, and we were exploring, and that was, it was a big bubble of consciousness that was exploding then. We didn't really have guides. We were out there on our own, experimenting and discovering levels of reality that I still say to people that I had experiences there, you know, 50 years ago, 55 years ago, that I am still digesting, if that makes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, what's awesome to talk to you about this, and it really opens up a lot of pathways, is that I feel that there is, at least I know in myself, I have a nostalgia for a period of time that I didn't live in. which is this idea of the 60s. I mean, people always ask me, Peter, they go, what time would you go back to? I always say the 60s. I always
60.
say the 60s. I mean, I love the 20s, but like to actually be in the 60s
It
feels
was,
like,
every generation says, oh, we had the best, but I do feel there was something extraordinary going on there. There was something that we discovered things that prior generations just didn't have the opportunity to.
yes,
They weren't given the tools and the opportunity, and we were. And maybe it was a planetary conjunction or a period of time in history that was destined to be. Who the hell knows? But it seemed like we were just opening doors, and reading Aldous Huxley, the doorways of perception and what is going on there, and Tim Leary up at Harvard doing the LSD experiments, and there was a lot of movement, and a lot of my friends were smoking marijuana, which was it's so funny because it was such an underground you know verboten thing, and now I'm driving in Massachusetts, huge billboards, best
yes,
cannabis dispensary, but at that time it was very hush hush, and definitely alternative culture, and so there's something to be said for being a discrete stream. But then sooner or later, I think it becomes whatever was avant-garde becomes mainstream
hmm, yes,
sooner or later, right? So, and then in 19 and I also was exposed through dropping out of college um, early on. I didn't last long, but I tell people that I dropped out of college because I wanted to learn, and it wasn't
yes.
right. It wasn't happening there. But I don't advocate that for everyone, but for me, it was what I needed to do, and I went on my own journey of being an autodidact, self-taught, and I went and I got a job. The first job I got was in a place called the Gotham Book Mart, which was I did not know this. I was innocent. I found an ad in the New York Times for a stock clerk wanted, and they needed good typing skills, which I had. And I went, and this place was the head of the Gurdjieff Ouspensky books, and the Krishnamurti Society, and the
Wow.
James Joyce Society, and the little mags, and it was just like a hotbed of poetry and literature and free thinkers, and I would be sending books out to Henry Miller in California and delivering books to Anais Nin, and I had no idea who these people were. Later on, people went, "You delivered books to Anais Nin? She was the foremost erotic female writer of the 20th century." I was like, "Okay, well, I didn't know that," but it was a marvelous, kind of cultural petri dish, and a lot of stuff going on there, and then in 1969, I went to visit a friend of a friend in Woodstock, and I had a voice. This has only happened a few times in my life. In the representational system world of NLP, they say somebody's primarily auditory, visual, kinesthetic. I don't see things that much, but I hear them. And I heard a voice in my head. I was walking down Main Street in Woodstock, and it said, "This is where you're supposed to live." So, and that's not something that happens every day.
Yeah.
So
A
it took me
clairsentient episode, one might call it.
clairaudient.
Or
Yeah,
clairaudient,
clairaudient.
clairaudient.
Yeah,
Yes, yes, sorry.
clairaudient. So I organized my life and moved up to Woodstock, and I at that point was a musician playing guitar, writing songs. I thought I was going to have a rock and roll band because that's what people were doing. It was 1969. The festival had happened that year, and I did not go to the festival, but I moved to the town that it was named after, the Woodstock. festival, and I moved up with a bass player and a keyboardist, and we were looking for a drummer, but we never found one.
Did
And
people just take risks back then? I mean, was
well,
this
I
the
can't
or just a
consider
you thing?
people. I always was like the fool in the tarot. I love that image. You know, the zero card, and he's just standing on the edge of the cliff with a smile and a flower in his hand. And he's stepping off the cliff, you know.
Yes.
And so I just had a session with a client earlier today where I was saying, you know, there's no growth without risk taking, right? So you have to find, you don't want to get burnt out and really take foolish risks. But on the other hand, if you play it too safe, you end up, you know, dying and with regrets,
Yes.
right? So,
This
so
is
I,
my constant dilemma.
right,
Constant.
right.
Yes.
Well, get over yourself.
I knew I was going to get schooled here. Yes,
No,
but
no. I mean, you know, look, I didn't know, but I just was like believing, and maybe this was the best gift that my parents gave me. They were not without, you know, no family's perfect. I, you know, have stuff I had to work through in therapy, but basically, they always said to me, told me that they love me, and you can do anything you set your mind to. That was the basic mantra. So that's incredibly empowering, right?
yes.
If you can give that gift, if I can give that gift to my clients, well, wow, you know, there's nothing they might not try. So, so I moved to, you know, here I was, the band didn't work, and I'm looking for employment, and I wander into and we called it back then an occult bookstore,
Oh man,
not a metaphysical or a new age, an occult bookstore.
I love this.
And, right? And I said, well, I have experience working in a bookstore. And they said, great, we need some help here. Do you want to work here? And it was, next thing I knew, I was working and then co-managing this occult bookstore. That was my college education. I was fascinated, and I read everything I could get my hands on, from astrology to Zoroastrianism, from A to Z. You know, it was, you couldn't find what you could find now online or even in Barnes and Noble, but still the basic Eastern and Western mystery traditions were represented in book form. And you know, I read Aleister Crowley and books on the tarot and oracular divination, the I Ching and the Tao Te Ching, and books on Tibetan Buddhism and on the alchemical tradition, and you know, the Sufis. And I just was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is the hidden dimension. This is the
Yes.
stuff, right, that they didn't talk about. And they didn't talk about at Bronx High School of Science, I'll tell you that much. They didn't
Yes.
talk about it in my family growing up, but this was what was like, you know, my God, this is what I'm drawn towards. I am just fascinated by mystery and by, as I said, I'd had experiences with psychedelics, but had no frame of reference.
Hmm.
Now I'm finding books by people who are writing about this.
Yeah.
And
That's
it was very, very encouraging.
talk about
Um,
resonance. I
yeah,
mean, really.
yeah. And I'd had experiences with sound when I was psychedelicized, where I went to a concert by the famous Ravi Shankar, the great sitarist, at Lincoln Center. And I sat in the second row, and I had taken mescaline, and I saw waves of color coming off of his strings. And somebody said, oh, that's synesthesia, where your brain translates one sense into another. I said, well, I don't care what you call it. What the heck was that?
Yes.
You know? And so I had these experiences where sound and music, more than as much as anything, brought me into touch with a higher dimension. And I would lose myself listening to or playing music. And then someone handed me this book, volume 2 of the Sufi message of Hazrat Ali Khan, who was a great Sufi mystic, and he wrote these 10 volumes, the Sufi message, and volume 2 was on the mysticism of sound and music. And I'm reading this book and I'm going, oh my God, this is what I experienced. Someone has written about it. And then I was off and running. And I was like, well, he's dead, but his son, Pir Vilayat Khan, is still alive and is running the Sufi Order of the West. So I want to go find him and see if I can hang with him. And, you know,
Yeah.
again, this was the time, somebody has referred to it as the time of the hunting of the gurus.
Hmm.
Right, right. People were, oh, I'm going following Rajneesh, or I'm
Yes.
going to, I'm going to do yoga with Swami Satchidananda, or I'm going doing this with that one or that one. So there was a lot of that, uh, uh, trying different spiritual paths, and seeing which ones fit. So that the Sufis were an important influence on me, and then you mentioned the word resonance.
Yes.
So one of the things that I found that I resonated with, to the point that, again, depending on your belief system, do you believe that we live many times, that we reincarnate? I choose to, but I can't prove it. It's a useful belief system. So in that belief system, I'm pretty sure that I had spent some lifetimes, or at least one, in the Himalayas, in the Tibetan Buddhist scene. Because as soon as I started reading books on this, it was like, oh, I know this. It's so familiar.
Wow.
And so I started tracking that. And one crazy wisdom teacher in particular, named Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who was known as the Lama who went bad.
Oh, tell me about this llama.
Yeah, no, he was very controversial. He was a highly regarded tulku, which is a term for a conscious reincarnation. Like he was the 14th, you know, version of himself, like the Dalai Lama has conscious memory of his other incarnations. So this guy, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, came over from Tibet. He fled Tibet and he went to school in England at Oxford and studied, uh, uh, comparative religion. But he had a prestigious title as a tulku, reincarnated, and he came to America. First, he went to Scotland, then he came to America, and he started influencing a lot of these spiritual seekers.
Hmm.
And he was a pristine teacher, and they were looking to him for teaching on these meditational traditions and points of view. But he also was um, different than most of the other spiritual teachers who came over, who were wearing robes and beads and saying you must be celibate and no drugs and drinking.
Oh
And this
man.
dude came in a three-piece Oxford suit and he sat on stage with a pitcher of clear liquid, drinking glass after glass, and people are going, it's gin, no, it's vodka. And he smoked cigarettes and he slept with his some of his disciples openly.
And that's the difference, right? Like you get the O shows and
Yeah, no,
these
he
other
was it
people who
was
are
there was all
hiding it.
yeah, it was all out in the open. And he said, "Don't try to give up your bad habits.
Oh, I
Just
like this guy.
get your butt on that meditation cushion every day. That if you try to push them away prematurely and you're not done with them, that won't work. But after building your own sort of sense of your practice, perhaps they will begin to fall away on their own."
Does that feels more legitimate than other
Well,
gurus?
it's in Tibetan Buddhism. There's three paths. They say the Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. The smaller vehicle is the Hinayana. You're just doing this for personal liberation. I'm just doing these practices so I don't have can escape the wheel of birth and death. Mahayana, you're saying I'm doing this for the benefit of all sentient beings. The Vajrayana is called the diamond path, and they say don't go on that unless you're sure, because if you slip off, you. But it is the secret teachings, and he was a Vajrayana teacher, and there's some controversy about this because they're like, well, those dudes go and meditate in graveyards, and they do these weird practices. So that's why there were sort of hush hush secret practices, the tantric initiations in India, same thing. You don't talk about, they're not for the masses, they're only for certain highly evolved beings. And I don't know, I don't do those things, but he apparently did, and had a reputation for being able to. There's a thing that I'm fascinated with, which I've written about, and I even quote Trungpa in my hypnosis training manual. I pulled a page out of one of his books, I stuck it in my manual, and it's on a concept called transmission.
Oh, I'm very interested in that.
Right? Transmission is the idea that a person can share or download some of their understanding or wisdom or point of view or state of consciousness into another person.
Oh
Right?
man.
Right? And so these mystical saints and gurus from the East had the reputation of being able to like do Shaktipat. They put their hand on your forehead and boom, all of a sudden you're like blissed out. Well, how did it? And Trungpa talks about that. He says there's a grand tradition of this, but in a sense, he says it's not really possible. Even the Buddha could not do that. So he said we have to kind of go through a theater of pretending that this other person has something of great value that they're going to give us, even though they're only we have that ourselves inside all the time. But we have to go through a kind of theater of emptying out the ego and saying, please, I would love this blessing. And then there's some ceremony or ritual, he said, or else the teacher may do something completely ridiculous or nothing is said at all, but then something happens and
Yeah.
there's an awakening. And the key phrase, which I love and come back to over and over again, is all that the teacher can do is create the situation.
Hmm.
So you're looking at Erickson, right? Who was like the dude, man, right?
Yeah.
Was the master hypnotist. He was able to perform what appeared to others to be mind reading, miraculous things, right? Erickson, I have a quote of his on my wall that I squintingly can read from here. It says, "It isn't the amount of time, it isn't the theory of psychotherapy. It's how you reach the personality by saying the right thing at the right time."
Right.
Right?
Right.
So, I'm waiting sometimes. I'm working with somebody for, I don't do long term work, but I might see them for a few sessions. And I know if I just say, oh, well, all you have to do is this. Well, no, they're not going to hear it.
So true.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a book by Paul Watzlawick called The Language of Change. And in it, there's a chapter called Anything But That. People say, tell me what to do. And you go, well, no, anything but that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
how to get to the point where they will hear it, where they can be open to it. And that's very patient. And that's what great teachers, I think, have is they'll just hang with you until that opening. And then they'll just shoot a dart right through, man. Boom. And you go, ah, right, of course. Why didn't I think of that? Or even better, oh, I just realized something. They don't even realize that you did something. They're thinking, oh, I
Yes.
just thought in the Tao Te King, the book of Lao Tzu, The Way of Life says a leader is best when people say, we did this ourselves.
Totally. Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Say with all the sales trainings, right? Persuasion is making them sell themselves on it, right?
Yes.
I
I
mean,
believe it's the same idea that it's best if it seems like I'm not doing this because you're leading me or telling me to. It's because I made this decision. I had this realization that this would be a good thing for me to do or buy or whatever, right? So yeah, that's always in the background, um, waiting. Um, the intention is to help the person be more fulfilled in their life, happier, healthier, um, more joyful, creative, whatever, right? That's why people come to see me. And I'm like, well, I don't know what you should do. Honestly, I'm having trouble now figuring it out for myself.
yes, yes.
I really don't. I mean, I'm not. I'm half kidding, but a lot of times I don't honestly know what they need to do. What I am going on, the underlying presupposition is that on the deepest level, they know.
Hmm.
They know what they need to do. And my job is helping them get to the point where they realize it.
Have you found it's always they all in your experience? I mean, I know there's using words like always kind of is not
Yeah,
not really the nicest thing to do in hypnosis, but let's go with it. Do you find that in your experience working, have you ever been stumped? Like been like, I
totally.
oh,
Absolutely.
interesting.
Of course. Of course. I mean, and I have had situations where the person walked out and said, well, that didn't help at all. And I'm like, well, I, I did the best I could. I'm
Yeah.
not God. I don't know what our karmic agreement was.
Mm.
I believe that we had an agreement to come together and do some work. And I, at this point, you know, Greg, it's been probably 25,000 clients that I've seen.
Holy moly.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's a lot. I've been working pretty much, steadily at this all the time since 84, 85, with periods of more or less busyness. And I worked, um, you know, I was very fortunate because my teacher was not only an extraordinarily gifted hypnotist and NLP practitioner, he was a gung ho guerrilla marketer. And I did not know anything about that. I was like, no, I love being a healer, but my dad was a salesman. I
Yeah.
grew up saying, I'll be anything but a salesman, right? That,
I
that was like, I don't want to do that. And Richard, my teacher, said, who are you kidding? You're always selling. You're selling your ideas, your beliefs, your opinions all the time. Get over yourself. I was like, oh, I never thought of it that way.
yes.
Right? So he said, um, stay humble, which was interesting coming from sort of a narcissistic personality type. But he, he said, stay humble, but be capable of shameless, ceaseless self promotion.
Oh gosh, which Richard are we talking about here?
Richard Zarrow.
Okay, okay.
I'm happy to give credit. He's gone many years off the planet, but he was the guy who brought me into the field,
Of
was my
hypnosis.
hypnosis. He was a student of John Grinder's.
Mm.
Direct. He'd been out in California with Grinder, came back uh, to Woodstock, opened a practice up. I was at that time working as a journalist, which is interesting because Phil, Farber and I had parallel careers in journalism back in the
Yeah.
70s and 80s, right? He was working for one paper, I was working for another.
Yeah, Phil Farber, who we had on a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
who wrote
Future Ritual.
Future Ritual, and yeah. The one about getting high.
Yeah. Well, Phil is an interesting guy, and Phil and his lady, who just recently passed, Janaba, had the Thelemic Arts Center in Saugerties, which is right down the road from where I live. And I went there. Now, the Abbey of Thelema was where Aleister Crowley held court, the famous bad boy of the Western mystery tradition, the Order of the
Yes.
Golden Dawn, right? So they had the Thelemic Art Center, and who do they bring in as a guest speaker? Robert Anton Wilson.
Oh man.
Yeah, so I'm like, wow, thank you. I've read this guy's writings, but I've never heard him speak. So I went there and heard him speak, and that was a lot of fun. But we talked about him, I think, before we went on this.
Yes, huge influence on the show. I mean, I definitely I w- maybe I'm destined to become a scholar of gorilla ontology because I feel like it's such an interesting idea and I don't see too much about it
I
except
don't even know that term. That's a good one.
oh man, I mean, it's what I used to say. When people, I mean, I credit him, but when I would open this show, I used to say, it's what did I say? It was challenging existing belief systems with radically unique ideas
Yeah.
designed to stimulate cognitive dissonance.
Oh, I love it.
In pursuit of raising consciousness. That's one
Yeah,
definition I've heard of that before.
I
But
love it.
that's what I love. I love, dude. If you were to tell me like Greg, everything you know about hypnosis is completely backwards, and actually I'm gonna tell you
Yeah.
this, which it
Uh-huh.
might be, I would love that episode. Tell me everything my guests have said is entirely wrong. And then the next person could go, this is why that guy's wrong.
Well,
It's that
the work of oh God, what was that guy who was claimed he was a walk-in for Thoth, and he was teaching all the flower of life stuff. Do you know who I'm talking about? I
I
can't
don't off
think
the
of his
top of my head.
name, but he had a big following for a while in the '90s, and one of his followers wrote a book called "Nothing in this book is true, but it's exactly how things are."
Oh, I've heard of that book title. I love
It's
that
a
title.
wonderful book, and it's like turn it around, and one of the things I haven't talked about, which is more recently in my life, is I'm on the board of the Coyote Institute, which was founded by my friend and good mentor and good friend Dr. Louis Mel Madrona, who's a psychiatrist who wrote a trilogy of books: Coyote Medicine, Coyote Healing, Coyote Wisdom, and other books on the narrative, the promise of narrative psychiatry and remapping your mind. And Lewis is part Cherokee and part Lakota. So he's a psychiatrist who's also like a sun dancer and a water pourer for sweat lodges. And I've known him for quite a while, for like, I don't know, 35 years we've known each other. And the coyote figure is a trickster figure.
Yes.
In Native American mythology, coyote turns things upside down. He is the epitome of the backwards Heyoka. People may have seen some movies where the medicine person is dressing half male, half female, riding around on the horse backwards. It's crazy wisdom. It's like doing the unexpected.
Crazy wisdom. I love that term.
Crazy wisdom, yes. And this is a great tradition, and that's what you're talking about. Like, what if I told you everything you thought you knew about hypnosis was wrong? Well, there's a book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by Shunryo Suzuki Roshi, and he brought a lot of the Zen teachings to the West, one of the first people. And he wrote this book. He said, in the expert's mind, there's very little room to learn anything. because you think you know everything. So
Yes.
cultivate beginner's mind, because in the beginner's mind, anything's possible.
Yeah.
So yeah, so challenging people's existing belief systems is one of Coyote's jobs,
I love that.
right? So when you bring Coyote medicine in, it's not what you expect. I think Erickson was a Coyote. Erickson, you read his case histories, he did outrageous things,
Yeah.
things that psychiatrists would be thrown in jail for today. Right.
Yes.
Because it was the 40s, the 50s that you could get away with things that were, he was very respectful of people, but he did not have a problem doing what they call, what is it, um, task therapy or arduous therapy, or it's not paradoxical intervention, but it's also it's controversial. There's a word for it, but he would give people, you know, well, go climb Squaw Peak and tell me what you see when you get to the top of it.
Yeah.
And there's films about Erickson where his children, documentaries are saying, I don't know, we'd see this guy out in the yard weeding the rose bush and cursing on his hands and knees because dad had told him to do it. And we couldn't figure out why he was doing it. But Erickson knew in his own kind of roundabout way that this was something that would help that person. And it's not always the logical thing. It's not always the textbook. Coyote doesn't go by the Coyote doesn't even read, so he wouldn't be using a textbook.
Yeah. But this is what's interesting about Erickson, in a way, and I think I would love for you to shed some light on this, especially with this occult education that you gave yourself. Um, I do think that is often missed, and it wasn't until you just spoke right now that I realized what he may have been implying when he supposedly read over Bandler and Grinder's books where they deconstructed him, and he said, what did he say? He's like, these guys have, something about the shell and not the
No, they
nut.
said we have Erickson in a nutshell, and he said they may have the shell, but they missed the nut.
Right.
Yeah,
The thing that's interesting is that, yes, very technically, they may have quote unquote modeled Erickson, but there's nothing in those books that gives you a hint of how to have the intuitive
no,
mindset
no,
that allows you to set up things that are outrageous. And I will say to his credit, I mean, I think Richard Bandler, who I know did do some modeling of Erickson, and
yes,
Gilligan did the formal deep trance identification, and I know
true.
that these guys did, and when they demonstrate things, they do sometimes do things that are a little provocative, a little
Chocolate,
weird. They do
yes.
follow their intuition, but that part is very hard to break down, and I don't even know if it's that easy to teach, honestly. I mean, you would know better than I
I,
would.
no, I agree with you. Um, Erickson said these guys explained what I do better than I can, right? Because he never made an attempt to categorize or reify or make a system out of what he did. And like with any most other geniuses, who they are is a result of everything in their life. And Erickson's life, as you know, was fraught with challenges and difficulties.
Absolutely.
And that's what made him one might say he was a classic case of overcompensation
Hmm.
because he couldn't use the same sense channels everybody else did. He had to find other ways to gather information.
Yes.
For those who don't know, Dr. Milton Erickson, um, just to summarize, was born, early part of the 20th century and died in 1979. And he grew up on a farming family, large farming family, and he was extremely dyslexic. So he did not speak until he was 4, and he didn't learn to read or write until much later. He was red and green colorblind, which led him to the intense fascination with the hypnotic induction of color blindness. The only color he could see was purple. He was atonal and arrhythmic, so he was fascinated with the alterations in breathing and rhythmical yelling that others called singing.
Huh.
And he was paralyzed totally in his early mid-teens with polio and was supposed to die. Doctors told his mother he's not going to live through the night. And he apparently got so upset. He said, what doctor would dare tell a mother that her child was not going to live through the night? And the story goes, and there's wonderful apocryphal stories about Erickson. He had to move a mirror so that he could look from his bed, paralyzed, out the window all night and watch the sunrise to prove them wrong. And then he went on to re-educate all the muscles in his body very slowly, which others said that can't be done, but he proved them wrong. And so he had to sort of, the things that we take for granted. Most of us don't remember learning to stand and walk and grab the grasping reflex. He had to teach himself all those things all over again from a mature level. So, of course, he learned to notice exactly how someone walked. All the little minimal cues. There's wonderful, these people who later Jay Haley saying, like Erickson took it as a personal message to him how someone came in and sat down in his office.
Hmm.
So most of us don't learn to pay attention to those things because we don't have to. We have our information coming in through our main sensory channels. He was exceptional because he had to be. And that's hard to teach, right? I used to go, I had one experience I had that I hadn't talked about, which was very, uh, had a big influence on me, was I met this fellow back in the 90s, David Jubb and his wife Annie, and he was a master hypnotist and NLP practitioner who was going for his doctorate in brain physiology at NYU. And we would take people out to this ranch in Oklahoma and put them on ropes courses and do adventure-based learning and hours of drumming and take away all their clocks and watches and take them out in the woods and teach them NLP and hypnosis. I was like, this is really interesting. This is removing all the normal reference points and putting somebody off balance in a completely different environment and wiring in through some of these physical exercises,
Yeah.
learning. You learn
It's embodied
it's
learning. It
exactly. And so, you know, we learned we would do things like um, sitting around in a circle and one person would close their eyes. Oh, and everyone else would reach over and touch them lightly, very lightly, like that, and say their name. And then people would take turns while that person's eyes were closed, touching, and they'd have to see if they could guess just from that touch who it was. And that's really refining your sense skills. Can I tell from just one finger? Because there's a lot of information coming through the temperature, the moisture content, the pressure. Everybody's a little different, but we don't usually pay attention to that. So Erickson called it minimal cues. And the great communicators do this, whether they're in sales or politics. Bill Clinton, you felt like he knew you,
yes.
right? Because he read people. There's a skill there in taking in the whole picture. And one of my NLP teachers at the New York Training Institute for NLP, Steve Goldstone, said 98% of intuition is just very high level calibration. Right. So calibration is a word that's used a lot in NLP. It's an engineering term that establish a baseline and you're calibrating against that. But I said to him, well, what about the other 2%?
Great
I,
point.
yeah. So we don't know a lot of time where things are coming in under the radar. We don't know what it means, but we're getting that information, and then the unconscious all of a sudden says, um, "This person has a secret that they're not telling you," and you kind of have this knowing, but you don't know how you know, and it may be something that they did. Erickson, you know, there's case histories where he knew this woman always kept her arm over her her breast, and he said she needs to go and have a mammogram.
Yeah, right.
Right? Yeah. So he noticed these things, and we don't always know what they mean. But people, one of the guidelines, one of the presuppositions in learning NLP and Ericksonian hypnosis is people are communicating all the time,
Yeah.
right? And it's not just what they say. That's the statistic I love to quote, which is, the joke is, well, 82% of all statistics are made up. But
Yes.
but the statistic is that human communication is 55% nonverbal, 38% rhythm, pitch, tone, and 7% the words we're using.
Yeah.
So this is why when we wrote this book, and Richard Zarrow encouraged me, and we wrote this book. This was the first book that I ever wrote. This was published in 1989. The Phone Book:
Oh,
Breakthrough
wow.
Neuro Linguistic Phone Skills for Profit and Enlightenment. And he said, people say you can't teach NLP over the phone because it's all about eye accessing cues and everything. He said, no, there's a lot that you can get through without any visual, because you have the words and you have the pitch and rhythm and tone of voice. Now, when you get into texting, that's when you're really limiting the band because you don't have anything but the words. And that's why there's so many miscues and miscommunications, I think, in texting. It's so much, I don't know.
I
I
agree.
know it,
No, I mean, look, as somebody in the modern texting sphere who has had to do, I mean, I'm sure it was this way in the 90s too, when people were doing online dating and meeting people via email first. There is no sense of who this person is and the connection you're going to have with a person
no,
via text, even if it's the best rapport texting you can possibly have.
right.
You'll never, I mean, same with LinkedIn. It's not even just dating. If you're messaging someone on LinkedIn, I didn't know that we were going to. I mean, I kind of had an intuition you would kind of bring this vibe, so I'm happy you are, Peter. But a lot of the time I have people on, or I'm DMing them and Facebook Messenger as guests, and it's totally different. You would just never know.
You don't know. You don't know. So I've been resisting uh, to a certain extent the movement to teach and do sessions via Zoom. I just don't. I'll give a talk, but I'm not going to train somebody and certify them in hypnosis. I know people do. I just choose not to.
I don't love it. I
Yeah,
don't love it.
right. I will do sessions if somebody's in Kansas, Canada, whatever. But my first choice is if you're 3 or 4 hours away, drive here, come and see me in person. There's so much more that we're missing. If I can't smell you, no, I mean, I mean that metaphorically. but there is something about the all the stuff that you can't see my feet
Yeah, exactly.
on this screen. You know, you can't see my hands unless I put them here. So we're taking all that in when we're calibrating somebody, and it's lost
And I
in.
would argue the transmission that you talked about
Yes,
earlier is lost. It's cut off. You don't get the full transmission.
I would say, from my understanding, and I'm not posing myself as an expert on transmission. However, it's something I'm fascinated with, and I think that's kind of when I'm teaching. That's always the challenge to me. How can I have these experiences and understandings from doing this over and over again for thousands of times? How can I transmit that to another person?
Yes.
That's a challenge, right?
Well,
Any
and it's
teacher.
a, is it that's the classic go there first? I get, but yeah, I guess they're different things, right? Going into trance first to get somebody into trance is different than transmitting an idea for learning purposes.
Well, listen, supposing you're a filmmaker and you have a vision and you want to make a movie that people will go to and they will understand your vision and they'll get it. Isn't that sort of a form of transmission?
For
I think,
sure.
right? Do you know who Alejandro Jodorowsky is? He was
Dune.
right. El El Topo was his first film. El Topo was made in Mexico. It had to be smuggled into the U.S. Very controversial. People were taking LSD and going to see his movie. He said, "I don't want them to take a pill and see my movie. I want my movie to be the pill."
Yes. Yes.
Right? Can a work of art, can a piece of music move us, move our state emotionally, energetically? I think so. I think that's always been the case, right? I mean, you were in theater. What's the goal of theater? Is to break the, like that the
Well,
person
there's a
forget.
reason they use it as a metaphor for trance when people go, I can't be hypnotized. Like they use that all the time. Oh, did you cry when you saw the
Yeah,
Wicked
yeah,
in movie theaters? Okay,
yeah,
you've
yeah,
been
yeah.
hypnotized.
Yes, yes. And uh, when a person forgets that it's a movie or a play, and they're so caught up in it, well, then you've made the transmission. They've
Yeah.
got it, right?
Yeah, it would be sad. I don't know if there's a human being out there that is I mean, it would be really weird to meet that person that's like, I've never enjoyed art because I've always known it was fake. Every movie is fake. Every play I see, I know it's fake. I can never get into it because I know they're just pretending. Like I've never met that person ever, which
Well,
tells me we're predisposed, or at least
uh,
to
you
be
know,
more imaginative, go
yeah,
into the imagination.
I'll tell you an interesting thing is I worked with a young man some years ago who was very, very gifted. He was a sculptor, and he was in his early 30s, and he had just learned that he was Asperger's. And he
Hmm.
was so happy that someone had told him because he said it explains so much. He said, that book that every person got, like that tells you how to interact socially? I never got that book.
That's yeah, right,
Right.
right.
But what I found was I couldn't, he could go into trance, but I couldn't use metaphor with him. He didn't get it.
Interesting.
And in NLP, they talk about chunking up and chunking down, right? Chunking up is going, from specific to general, and chunking down is going from general to specific.
Yeah.
Metaphor, they say, is chunking sideways. So,
Right.
how do I, say this is like that? You make the leap. I'm telling you a story about this, but it's really about that. But if you don't do metaphor, you don't get it. You're like, why are you telling me that story about the cat and the mouse and the cheese? It doesn't. Why are you telling me that? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. What else? Where else you want to go?
No, I mean, look, hey, I was gonna say, seeing a metaphor. I mean, I feel like we have been. You are. I'm never sure if I'm gonna get the hypnotic experience with someone that's an Ericksonian, but we have definitely. There are many loops. There are many loops in this episode.
Well, I was wondering about that because did you get the idea of open loops from loops from
Nested? Y-
nested storytelling?
yes, I did.
Somewhat, yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I love that, and I have been known to do it a lot, and not even know that I'm doing it.
Yeah, I didn't even know we were talking about the occult bookstore. Then you got onto this path about this guy in the three-piece suit, and then we somehow ended up.
And on the ranch in Oklahoma. I
yeah.
know. It's well. Here's a funny story. I was asked many years ago to go up to Canada and teach Ericksonian hypnosis to a group of hypnotists because the person up there had taught them non-Ericksonian hypnosis. And she heard me at a conference. She said, "Would you come and teach my students Ericksonian hypnosis?" I said, "Sure. That's the way I learned it. Sure." So I'm up there, and for an hour or two, I'm rambling. And after about an hour and a half, I say, "Now, what you've just experienced was a series of nested loops." And they, because they're coming from this left brain place, go, "Could you put up a flow chart?"
Ha ha.
And I
Yeah.
said, "With your help, maybe we can reconstruct it because I don't think these things through in advance. I trust my unconscious to go that there's a underneath the surface a progression that one thing is connected to another, and there are links and loops, and I will come back and close them at some point.
Right.
But I don't set it. I don't think ahead of time. Like Tad James' book is wonderful examples. He gives 5 loops. We start this story, and then you tell this story within that story, and then there's another story within that story, and you can teach that, but it's best when it happens naturally.
Do you feel you're closing? Do you close the loops?
You tell me.
I
What
mean,
about
you
that
know,
guy in the 3-piece suit? Whatever happened to him? What about the people out on the ranch in Oklahoma? I mean, I'm giving you a patchwork quilt because you said, "Who are you? What have you done? What made you who you are today?" And these are all the streams that came in to create the place where I write a book, What Is Your B.S? And within it, I'm making reference to my experience with Tibetan Buddhists and with my shaman teacher, Beautiful Painted Arrow, who was extraordinary. I mean, at the same time as I'm studying hypnosis in the late 80s, I'm contacted as an ex journalist. My friend says, "There's this Native American guy coming who works with sound. Would you come out of retirement as a journalist and do a piece on him because you work with sound?" And I said, "Okay." And I go, and there's this guy, Beautiful Painted Owl, Joseph Real, and he's talking, and I said, "Can I set up my recorder, tape recorder?" And he says, "Oh, right." And I set it up, and I'm listening to him. I'm making a few notes, but at the end of like 45 minutes, I get up to switch the tape, and I see it's stopped. About 2 minutes in, he goes, "Yeah, that kind of stuff happens around me." So, so that was the beginning of our relationship. But then, year after year, he'd come back, and I was fascinated because I didn't know what was going on, but I'd go and listen to him talk, and it would be so elegant and poetic and inspiring. And I'd walk out of his talk and I'd feel elated. And somebody would say, "Well, what did he talk about?" I say, I can't for the life of me tell you. I don't remember. It was something about light and sound, but I don't really remember. And the next year I'd go back and I'd be like determined. Okay, this year I'm really going to pay attention. Same thing would happen. So after about 3 years, I said, I've gotten to know him a little bit. He's become a teacher of mine. And I said, Joseph, that's his other name, Joseph Real. I said, Joseph, did you ever study hypnosis? He goes, oh, yeah, sure. So he was using language filled with nominalizations, which are vague, fuzzy, hallucinatory, right?
Yeah.
And they lead you into your imagination because you can put whatever meaning on them you want,
Yes.
right? And he used that so beautifully, and he became a major teacher of mine. And I'm still in awe of how he did what he did because it was so graceful and just organic.
Do you think
And
was there an intention behind doing it
yes,
that way?
yes, his intention was to translate the untranslatable.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Right? He wanted to give transmission, but he's like, you're not going to get it by breaking down my description in in terms of it's something to get you out of your ordinary state of mind. That if you're listening to me and you go into a dreamlike state and you have a trance-like dreamy experience, that's what I'm talking about.
Peter, this is exactly kind of where my interest lies
Yes,
in making popularizing this stuff because I
yes,
am so into the idea of we're all about I mean I've even thought about like copyright, don't take this idea people, immersive language, because that word immersion, everybody these days is clamoring. If you go to New York City, we're all looking for immersion. And what does that mean? We put up big screens with big special effects so you feel like you're in another world. And I'm sitting here going, yeah, you know what's immersive? When a person is on stage and you just listen to every word and they pull you somewhere, or you meet someone in a conversation and all of a sudden, like the world fades away and you're just zoomed in on them.
yeah,
That is what we need more. That's that 60s shit,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. And
Uh,
if somebody says to me after a session that I don't really remember a lot of what you said, but it felt good. I'm like, exactly.
yeah.
That's that's the point. And Erickson had this phrase that I like to quote. He would lean over to his clients in the middle of a session and he'd whisper to them. He'd say, your conscious mind is very intelligent, and your unconscious mind is a hell of a lot smarter.
Yes.
So there's that setup. Oh, yes. First, you're complimenting them. Wow, thank you. My conscious mind is very intelligent. And then he's saying, but put it in perspective. It's way less important than your unconscious mind.
Yeah.
So, my goal is that people enjoy this podcast, but not necessarily be able to reiterate exactly what I said. I mean, maybe, but I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's not the point. The point is immersive.
Yes.
To piggyback off you, how can we create an immersive language experience that is using language to pull people into the pool of the collective unconscious?
What is possible once we're there, you think? I mean, do you
What's not possible? I mean, anything is possible. We don't know what's possible. We don't know what is possible, and that is when we stand at that place, I say when you're in the medicine wheel, the directions have significance. And if you stand in the east represents beginnings, the rising sun. In the morning, you wake up, the day is ahead of you. Everything is possible, right?
Yeah.
By the time the day is halfway through, you're like, oh, well, half the day is gone. You know, by the end, the sun is setting, and you're like, okay, got to wait till tomorrow. But when we're in that place of the East, metaphorically, everything is possible. We don't know what's possible, right? And when we start to limit it by saying that's not possible, I read a lot of science fiction as a kid, right? That was my fantasy science fiction. There was a story that made a huge impression on me about a group of scientists who were called together. And they said, this man, we have a film of, he invented an anti-gravity device. And we have a short film, but then his lab blew up and all his equipment was destroyed and his notes, and he died. But all we have is this short clip of this anti-gravity thing. And your job is to figure out how he did that. And they said, it's not possible. And they said, but look. And they went to work and they worked and they worked and they invented an anti-gravity device. And then they were told, we made that up.
That's good. That's good.
Right? That never existed. We created that to convince you it was possible. And once you thought it had been done and it was possible, then you made it happen.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
I love that story,
That's a
right?
great
So
story.
it's a great story, and it's a good metaphor for, you know, telling your clients, what if, I mean, Tony Robbins says, what would you attempt if I gave you a guarantee you could not fail,
Right.
right?
Right.
Most people, a lot of people stop themselves from attempting things because they're like, yeah, but what if I didn't make it, right? Why should I bother trying out for the basketball team because I might not make it? And then of course you won't make it because you don't even try out.
Yeah.
So, so you know, there's a quote that I have that I got from my buddy Richard Zarrow, who was a quote from Goethe. You know, who I used to think was pronounced Goethe, but it,
Yes.
right,
Yes.
Goethe said, "Whatever you can do or dream you can do, begin it. Whatever you
Yes.
can do or dream you can do, begin it. Genius has boldness, power, and imagination." So, you know, the saddest thing is like some clients that I've had who are older and they're like, well, I always wanted to travel. And first I was married and then the kids were young and then I couldn't leave. And then my, you know, wife was sick and now, you know, and now I can't, I can't do it. And I have regrets. It's very sad,
Yeah,
right? I
that
mean,
is
you understand.
talk about a limiting belief.
Yeah, we understand this was the arc of their life. This is their story, and they're sticking to it. But at any point, you could have said, this is a priority. This is important to me. I'm going to make this happen. You know,
Yeah.
you talked about taking crazy leaps, and, you know, and it was something they did in the 60s. Well, in 1978, I had a 2 year old and a 4 year old, and I was married, and I was living in Woodstock, and I was working. This is before I got involved in hypnosis. I was working for the newspaper. And I said, we're going to go live in Holland. We're going to move. We're going to go live in Europe. And we had some friends and they said, yeah, you can come stay with us. And we picked up and we left. And we lived there for 3 years. And more conservative members of our families said, well, you have a job waiting there for you. I said, actually, no, I don't. Well, you have a house, an apartment. No, we're going to stay in our friend's spare room. well, you must have a nest egg saved up, right? I said, actually, we bought one-way tickets because we didn't have enough for round-trip tickets. And this is again the fool. And it was difficult, but ultimately, we're so glad we did it. We had our great European adventure.
Fools have more fun for sure.
Fools, I think they do. And, I want to, if anyone is interested, is it all right if I put a little plug in?
Yeah, put a plug in,
Okay.
please.
So I'm going to need them soon because my airplane. uh, I live in Woodstock, and we're going to do 3 days with my friend, Dr. Louis Melmadrona, the coyote medicine guy that I spoke about, and his wife, Barbara. We do these retreats, and we're doing one early March in Woodstock called March Madness. March Madness, and the subtitle is um, Holy Fools, Sacred Clowns, and Crazy Wisdom. So
uh,
anyone who's interested in that can contact me through my website, transonics.com, as well as, if you want to see what else I've got going on, other mischief and
you've
trainings.
hooked me, man. You've hooked me. I
I,
may be there in
I,
March.
I dangled the bait, right?
You
Come to beautiful Woodstock,
you just I don't know if this was just a pitch for me to come the entire time, and if it was, well
I,
done, sir.
Greg, I do the long con. If I'd come out and said that in the beginning, that would have been too obvious,
No, that sounds so
right?
cool. I am
No,
looking.
we're,
Yes.
we're going to have a blast. I've been working with these folks for years, and we just play. We have, Barbara has her degree in creative arts therapy. She brings a pile of puppets and stuffed animals and masks, and we do mask making, and we do uh, group hypnosis and storytelling, and
Yes.
it's just, you know, if you've read my book, I have this three-step hierarchy in here that I determined for myself, my values hierarchy, which
And we're
is
going to link all these things for everybody listening. We will make sure
yeah,
we link to Peter's
yeah. So
website as well as the
yeah,
new book.
thank you. So my values hierarchy is have fun, help people, make money, in that order. I have decided that we come here, we incarnate as human beings to have fun and to learn. I think that's why, otherwise, we'd be roaming around as discarnate spirits,
That's all I care about.
right? I mean, a discarnate spirit cannot enjoy a grilled cheese sandwich,
Yeah.
you know, the sensory pleasures. So have fun, help people. It's very important for me. Um, it just seems like it's what we're here to do: help each other and make money. And that's I have people who have prosperity issues. I work with them on that because they have had bad ideas or erroneous programming from their parents about money,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And so they need to reconfigure their values and say there's nothing wrong with money.
Let
Yeah.
me ask you something. You know what? I'm going to ask you probably the most. We're going to go kind of like sideways to this trance experience that I'm on right
All
now with
right.
you. Um, so here's something that I've always had an issue reconciling, and I'm curious what your view is on this. There's and actually James Tripp, who I love, had him on the show many times. He talks about kind of like light or white path work and black path work, in terms of different approaches, and it is kind of related to that. The idea that you could work at the belief level,
Yeah.
which is you have the limiting belief, and that means there's language around it, and there's something that, I mean, the classic, like, because of X, this causes Y belief, that sort of thing. And that is classically what is dealt with in hypnosis and NLP and very powerful stuff. But then when you're a student of stuff like the Eastern traditions,
Yeah.
I mean, to me that like Alan Watts was really an entry for me about a lot of this
Yes.
stuff.
Yes.
um and you
That voice
go,
on that voice. Alan
Yes,
Watts.
love that guy.
Yeah.
Love that guy.
The laugh. Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder, though. I sometimes go, what? It almost feels as if Eastern thought and philosophy goes against hypnosis. I've never been able to reconcile them. And the reason is because they go, well, thought is an illusion.
Yeah.
So if you're dealing with a belief issue, intervention is so, okay, you're accepting that thoughts are real versus this side, which is saying, no, 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 why are you even struggling with beliefs when words aren't even something to hold on to? How do you reconcile that in your work? How have you?
Oh my goodness. That's a complex equation, complex equivalent that you've given me there, right?
Yes.
That I when I was involved with meditation and spiritual pursuits and so on, and they all said, "Oh, hypnosis is not good. It's mind control."
Right.
Right? It's you don't want somebody else controlling your mind, and that's a misconception, right? We try to clarify that for with my clients that they're sometimes concerned. Well, you're going to control, I'll lose control. I say, well, the reason you're here is because your fucking life is out of control.
Yes.
You want more control, not less control. Oh yeah,
Yes.
I thought of it that way. But this is again, um, the bottom line is if it works, it works. So if you call it, you know, and say a lot of people, I live in Woodstock, it's one of the spiritual meccas of the known world, right? Everybody here meditates. Oh, they did TM, they did this, that. They come in, they say, how is hypnosis different? And I say, well, that's a very good question because I've been doing both for decades. So my understanding is that physiologically, they're very similar. If you measured someone's brainwave and galvanic skin response who was meditating and someone who was in a self-hypnotic state, they'd be identical. Most forms of meditation are essentially goal-less. You're just going in to hang out and be aware of the thoughts. In hypnosis, you're going in to do some work in general, right? You're entering that state with the idea I can becoming aware of my thoughts. Yes, that's the first step. That's mindfulness meditation. Secondly, I can have some ability to shape and form my life depending on the images and beliefs that I hold. They're not fixed, they're mutable, right? It's all very mutable. And that realization is huge because then you become a conscious, like, what is that? Conscious co creation.
Mm,
That's
yes.
very hip in the world of New Age thinking. That maybe there is a creator, but we're involved in conscious co-creation.
Right.
Um, you know, Robert Anton Wilson talks about reality tunnels. I always loved that phrase, right? That we're looking down this tunnel, and all you see is what's down that tunnel. There's a lot of other stuff going on, but you're looking down that one tunnel. That's all you see. So, what if we can open up our vision and see in quantum physics? And one of the things that was great about my work with Richard Zarrow was he was way ahead of the curve. He was talking about, what the bleep stuff down the rabbit hole and multiverse and quantum entanglement and the dancing Wu Lee masters back in the early 80s. And Michael Talbot, the holographic universe. And he's saying, what if when you go into a hypnotic state, it's like a big radio dial, right? And the old you know, uh, analog radios, right? Not digital, a radio dial, and that different wavelengths are right next to each other. And each one of those represents a possible reality. And what if you can move the dial just a little bit, that any reality that you can imagine exists? And how can we move ourselves? This is the stuff of science fiction, but it may also be the physics of the future, right? That there are all these parallel multiverses out there, and we can shift,
Yeah. I don't know if you've
right?
read the book Reality Transurfing, but I mean, it could be a repackaged version of this. It's getting bigger. It
No,
is
I don't know.
directly about this guy. It's the new way of talking about this. I'll
The one thing I want to mention, because I have seen some of your other podcasts, and I thought you'd be fascinated to know that in my journalism career in the 70s, I interviewed John Keel.
Oh.
Yeah, he was spending summers in Woodstock. John Keel, for those who don't know, is the man who coined the term Men in Black. He wrote the book, The Mothman Prophecies, that the movie was based on. He was one of the world's leading ufologists.
Oh
Now,
man.
talk about belief systems. And I'm like, this guy's here. I'm going to go talk to him. I want to know what's inside his head. What does he think? What does he believe? Are you familiar with his point of view?
I don't know, actually. I don't know his point of view. I'm
Oh,
very
so
intrigued.
he said there's a mischievous, mysterious energy, and sort of from another dimension that phases in and out of our reality historically through different periods of time and different cultures. And it dresses itself in the form and shape that will be culturally appropriate. Back when we believed in little people, we saw leprechauns and pixies and fairies. People who are religious see visions of the Blessed Mother. Now we're in a technological age. We're going out into space. We see aliens in spaceships. He said it's just that same mischievous energy.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And he was convinced. He said, I've tried tracking them down. I can't find them. You know, all the government cover ups and areas. I always say Studio 54, but it's something.
Yeah, different stuff.
But, I don't know. I mean, there are people who swear they've been there, they've seen the bodies of dead aliens. I don't know, but I like John's interpretation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Um, so oh my gosh, there were many loops that were just open
Another
there.
loop. Yeah. I thought I'd
I
throw that one in.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. John Keel. Wow, I'm gonna definitely go down that rabbit hole a little bit later.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I guess in conclusion then,
Yes.
there is no conclusion. No, wait. There well, that's true. There is still I'm hearing what you're saying about this notion of whatever gets the job done.
Yes.
And we're talking about opening up people to different frequencies. I mean, is it just one of these things where to me, the one way I can reconcile this is the old 5D 3D paradigm where people go, well, I'm a 5D being living in a 3D world. And that's
Yeah,
kind of
I've
what I
heard
think
that.
about this. It's like, well, you can't go through life just being blank mind all the time. Like, there are beliefs that you're going to encounter if you're going to really engage with the world in the way other people like. I just don't think we're in a culture where people are beliefless and will ever be.
No, no. I mean, I don't, I can't conceive of how that's possible.
I mean, that to me is sort of like the 5D promise. It's like we're beyond
I,
words. We're all just in a love bubble. Like I don't see it happening that way.
I mean, I can be open and non-judgmental about other people's beliefs, but sooner or later, I have to choose which ones I'm going to live my life by.
Yeah.
You know, it's all competing beliefs about health protocol, diets, vaccines, all that stuff. Politics, uh, so much. The ecology, the economy, the history of the world, part one.
Yes.
you know, is there a future? I hope so. I believe that I will go to sleep tonight and wake up tomorrow, but there's no guarantee.
We can't end on that. My gosh.
Right? Well, my teacher used to say the biggest trance everyone's in is that they go to sleep every night pretty much believing they will wake up more or less exactly the same person the next day. And so they do.
Oh, that is good.
Right. And so in order to change, you have to begin. I use the CBA formula, which is conceive, believe, achieve. Before anything changes, you have to be able to conceptualize it. Right.
And you said you're not a visual person, so for people out there, I mean, I know I sometimes struggle
Well,
too.
can you right. I have somebody comes in to see me to stop smoking. I used to work in a doctor's office. The doctors would send me clients. This woman came in. She was, I don't know, Dr. Steve said I have to come see you to stop smoking. I said, well, do you want to? She said, no.
Yeah.
I said, well, can you conceive of yourself as a non-smoker? That doesn't necessarily mean visualizing. It's just, can you imagine yourself as that? She said, no. I said, well, then get out of here.
That is a great distinction. I've never heard that way of putting it. I
Right?
love that.
I can't make you do something if you're not can't imagine it. You know, if you said, well, part of me wants and part of me doesn't, but if you can't even conceive of it, don't waste my time or your money.
Yeah.
You know? So the conceiving of new reality, of a different future, and then convincing yourself, making it believable. That's a lot of our job as coaches. Well, can you see how this could be possible? Believable. And then the achieving of it comes naturally, I think, as the third step. Okay, so is this a good note to end on?
Oh, I mean, you're definitely a return guest material, my friend. We have not talked about sound
Not at all. Nothing about sound
and I
because
love that. That's also
I
something I'm
have my
interested.
gong up there. You can see right behind me, but I'm not going to play those instruments today.
No, you don't have to. You don't
No.
have to. But I'm
All
glad
right.
to know there's so much more, Peter, here. This
Yeah, there's
is
a lot.
well, everybody should check out Transonics. We'll link that.
Yes.
Um, as
Sonic.
well
Yeah.
as this book. What is your BS? Exploring belief systems through hypnosis and NLP. I'm excited. I'm excited to dig into this. I actually did not want to read the book before the interview, and
Okay. Well, even better.
so that's why
Then.
I'm like,
Yeah. All
yes,
right. Now you can read it and say, but we didn't even talk about this or that. And so,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I didn't want to ruin the magic for myself. Sometimes it is good to read it, but
Well,
the
I wrote it. It was an easy write because I had been writing articles for a professional magazine called Unlimited Human that's put out by a hypnosis organization for a number of years. And I had this collection of short pieces. They kind of gave me carte blanche. They said, write anything you want. And I said, I contacted them. And I said, can I have reproduction rights? They said, well, yeah. I mean, we didn't pay you for them, so you, of course they're yours. So I kind of lined them up and said, can I add a few things, take away a few things? And basically, I have a book written. And I wanted to use some case histories, which
yeah,
are some interest to people who are practicing hypnotists, but I also wanted to include general essays that would help people understand how we're all moving in and out of trance and how we use belief systems and choose them and that process. So hopefully it's accessible to the general public as well.
yeah. Well, I'm excited to dig in.
Okay.
And I'm excited, yeah, that we've begun this relationship.
Yeah.
So this was a great conversation, really. And I'm sure the listeners, as we know, there will be things that they may come to conclusions about later. Maybe who knows when? But there's a
Well,
lot here.
I look forward to continued conversation.
Thank you so much, Peter. Great having
Okay.
you on.